With his portrayal of the naive but unwavering Forest Gump, Tom Hanks cemented his place in Hollywood history, a place where brilliant lights frequently eat delicate spirits. Along with the fearless Philadelphia attorney who dared to face the merciless brutality of destiny, there was the solitary man drifting on a castaway island. In a city that is all too accustomed to coldness and pretense, he has been the embodiment of warmth and kindness for decades. But beyond that everlasting radiance, behind that grin that there are wounds that will never completely heal, yet has comforted millions of hearts. Long, frigid evenings that make it hard to breathe. At those times when the shadows swallow him whole and cling to his spirit as if plotting its disintegration. Even though he is 68 years old, the man who was once believed to be unbeatable is still fighting the worst battles of his life, including an illness that has befallen him and his life partner and lingering memories of agony that won't go away. Keep staring. What he's going through right now might be the most significant part of his life. Remember the most generous actor in Hollywood by giving him a like if any of his performances moved you. Some people's hearts have holes that can't be filled by childhood. Tom Hanks came into this world on July 9, 1956, in the sleepy little town of Concord, California, without the safety net of a stable family. While his mother, Janet, was still trying to establish herself, his father, Amos, was a nomadic cook who barely scraped by. Stability was even more unusual than money, which was seldom plenty. In 1960, when he was 4 years old, his parents' marriage ended in icy silence that left him gasping for air, rather than savage disputes. This shattered the delicate framework of his childhood. The family was split in half as a result of the split. Tom and his 2 siblings followed their father into the nomadic rhythm of existence, hopping from one kitchen to another and from job to job, as their mother remained with their youngest brother. A divorce was only one part of this. The only world he had ever known was being shattered. Tom had lived in 10 different houses by the time he was 10 years old, the most of which were small rentals with peeling paint and the lingering scent of someone else's life in creepy corners. Loaned beds were used. The walls were strange. The meals were typically light and uncomplicated, satisfying the appetite but not the soul. Every time he uprooted his life, it was to a new school, more lunches by himself, and the constant reminder that he was an outsider. He mastered the art of dodging obstacles, wore the same clothing until they were worn out, and was appreciative of any room he was given. An outsider and a geek, I was. His words in hindsight, but there was more truth behind those remarks. It was had discovered at a young age that pleading for affection or security always resulted in letdowns. A house was not his home. A suitcase, that is still. There was a spot where he felt acknowledged, even if he lived in a state of relative financial and emotional hardship. Here, on stage, under the humming lights of dusty school auditoriums, he could enter a different world. In a world where ears were truly heard, where cheers ended the eerie stillness that had been plaguing him. All that clapping was for show. Oxygen was used. The conclusion of every performance was consistent though. The lights went out, the curtain came down, and he returned home to yet another unfamiliar room, this time with a makeshift bed. Decades later, Tom used the adjective lonely to characterize his youth. That word is nearly intolerable coming from a man who would portray on television love, kindness, and connection. He silently vowed to himself during those restless days and lonely nights. When he finally discovered his voice, he would let it ring out so that everyone might feel seen, protecting them from the invisibility that had molded his life. With each new role, act of generosity, and struggled to overcome the shadows that would never let go. That promise he made in the impoverishment of stability and the yearning for belonging would serve as his compass. The arrival of adulthood was not a savior. When Tom Hanks, then 21 years old, entered the world in 1977 with a beaten suitcase, a broken typewriter, and the tenuous belief that he could make it in a city that wouldn't mind if he vanished, he experienced yet another form of isolation. He took a bus to New York after graduating from Sacramento State University. The city appeared enchanted on postcards, but was icy and uninteresting when he got there. Nights were colder than he had ever imagined. Apartments were tiny, and rent was expensive. He frequently wondered if this was the beginning or the end of his dreams as he slept on floors and couches in small flats with complete strangers. It seemed like his pockets were never filled. What he could pull together for meals was his change. He relied exclusively on casting calls for support. Still, the majority of them remained silent. During years of conversations looking back, Tom remembers leaving tryouts certain that the casting directors didn't perceive a leading man, but rather a stocky young man with an eccentric voice and a lack of charisma. Being so amiable almost worked against him in a field that valued confidence and swagger. "I figured out pretty quickly that the room wasn't going to need me," he whispered. "Bringing something home at night is no easy feat." Despite facing rejection, he remained resilient. It cut him. He exploited each possibility, regardless of how insignificant or shameful. Bit parts in off-Broadway shows, low-budget horror flicks that barely covered rent, such as He Knows You're Alone from the 1980s. During the late 1970s, he worked as a stagehand at Cleveland's Great Lakes Theatre Festival, where he performed, in addition to constructing sets, hanging, lighting, and sweeping the stage. "Those years were formative," he said, looking back. "No one will ever notice how hard you work if you just turn up and do your job." Even if you could call it a breakthrough, his doggedness paid off in 1980, when he was only 24 years old. He played a character in the offbeat comedy Bosom Buddies, who dressed like a woman in order to secure an apartment. Nothing more than a passing fad. However, it was a hole that Tom had been trying to punch for a long time. However, the terror persisted long after that. His worry of losing sight of his dream and ending up back on the bus with a bag in tow was something he'd felt every time a job ended. Tom now acknowledges that his early years were not focused on striving for greatness. Survival was the theme. "I didn't have a plan B," he said in an interview given to him many years later. "The boy from the 10 distinct places who felt invisible. I just knew I couldn't go back to feeling invisible." The spirit of his boyhood home lingered within him, encouraging him to remain on stage for an extra minute or two, in the hopes that the standing ovation would signal that he was worthwhile. "To be retained this time, now that I'm a Hollywood star. The road from those restless nights in New York looks like fate." For the time being, nevertheless, it required constant fortitude. An unsung hero fights a silent war while carrying screenplays and bus fare in his battered shoes. That unseen struggle molded the guy who would go on to be hailed as Hollywood's most generous star. Tom Hanks went from being a light-hearted comedian to a groundbreaking actor, and the world watched. As spectators, we found each stage to be completely natural, starting with the gentle awe of Large and ending with the scathing candor of Philadelphia. From the ethereal beauty of Forest Gump to the melancholy rumble of Castaway, the price that lay behind all the acclaim was invisible in the bright light. Because he rose to greater heights with each part he played, a more profound inquiry was made of his physical self, his intellect, and his emotions. He played a stigmatized character in Philadelphia and lost approximately 35 pounds for the role. Not only did the outfit undergo a transformation, but the spirit itself appeared to shed some pounds. After the set went silent, a shiver ran down the spine of the audience. Love washed over everyone after Forest Gump. Despite his affable demeanor, he bravely decided to forego a guaranteed $7 million compensation in exchange for a percentage of the film's earnings. A courageous and astute choice that netted over $70 million. But it also transformed the cheers into pressure and tomorrow into a challenge he was sure he would overcome. War trauma had to be handled with dignity and respect in Saving Private Ryan, and the days concluded with a moral rather than physical exhaustion that taught humility rather than pride. His body reflected a man stripped to solitude in Castaway, and the months of near silence created a loneliness that took long to lift. Seeing oneself alone on film can create reverberates far away. His audience was looking for victories, but he was feeling the pain. And far than bringing relaxation, celebrity brought further demands in the form of hectic schedules, constant media, and the pressure to maintain an air of gentle everyman status in America. Quiet chambers became more important than packed premieres. He likened his experiences at the peak to being inside a lovely room with a gently locked door. This picture depicted the paradoxical nature of success, how it can both bring you joy and bind you. On nights when his charismatic, beloved eyes were just exhausted, he would question his identity away from the camera. Despite this, he remained dedicated to his art, reading and preparing, and prioritizing genuine people and their emotions over statistics and noise. During introspective periods, he said that, by his own standards, only a handful of his numerous films were satisfying. As it put the focus on service rather than vanity, this modest standard hurt a little, but helped a lot. That is why his Peak was never meant to be a resting spot, but rather a strict path to be walked with self-control and concern, transforming stress into meaning, admiration, and duty, so that an audience member may leave the theater feeling somewhat less isolated. Tom Hanks still carried a secret pain from a long time ago, even when he was at the pinnacle of Hollywood fame and had awards and standing ovations. He was once a scared young man who sought refuge in a woman he believed might make up for his troubled upbringing, long before he became a cherished figure to the world. He wed Samantha Lewis for the first time out of loneliness rather than preparedness. Even though he was troubled by the broken family he had experienced, he held on to the hope that marriage and love might save him from the cycle he dreaded. However, the ground was too shaky due to youth and desperation. Knowing deep down that he was ill-equipped to handle the impending stress, responsibility, and sadness, he became a husband and father at the tender age of 21. He would look back with regret on the tragic muddle that began when, at such a young age, he confused loneliness for love and fear for preparedness. This misunderstanding eventually led to decades of unspoken shame. The fault lines deepened as his work demands increased, and Samantha, who was kind but burdened, fell behind a life that was moving too fast. He could no longer bear the weight of the love that had promised to ground him. Not only did the quiet divorce of 1987 feel like the end, but it also marked the beginning of a shame that would linger for years, shattering him. He had promised himself that he would break the cycle of broken homes. Still, he saw Colin and Elizabeth juggle two sets of responsibilities, just like he had done before. It is ironic that an actor who was once lauded for his role as a reliable father figure now privately questions whether he let his own children down. On occasion, the sound of the applause from the set resounded like an empty echo. Upon entering a trailer where nobody was waiting, he had just finished filming sequences with his family. In retrospect, he did acknowledge that the quiet of a motel room upon realizing his from a distance, youngsters were in pain. He would sometimes sit in the car rather than enter an empty house during the long nights, since no amount of achievement could erase the guilt, and the silence at home hurt more than any review. He saw a parent who had missed out on bedtime tales, school performances, and the opportunity to express his pride in the present, even though the world saw a strong guy. More than any criticism, he drew terror from his children's quiet. On certain nights, a son hardly looked him in the eyes, and every public display of affection was televised. Trusting off-screen made me feel uncomfortable. He cared about Samantha forever, and that was the toughest fact of all, accompanied with an unwavering sadness rather than the radiance of first love. Later on, she was ill with bone cancer, but he was there for her every step of the way. He paid for her treatment, paid frequent visits, sat by her bedside, and held her hand as the memories of their youth as dreamers came flooding back. Still, all he could do was see their deterioration. He couldn't mend the rift that had previously existed between them. She was still married to the boy who had vowed to keep her safe. Sometimes setbacks lurk in the shadows, he'd say, and the key is to keep turning up nice, even when it won't influence the outcome. This was not sensationalized news. Rather, it was the story of a man who made an effort, failed miserably, and then bore the consequences. Because a parent wondered if love alone could ever be sufficient as cameras documented the ascent of a legend behind them. Some wounds don't even try to be noticed, and yet, they are not easy to shut. Then, life put Tom Hanks through another test right when he thought he had finally achieved some serenity. Not in the role of a camera-framed actor, but as a spouse, companion, and guy whose steady hand would be requested in times of darkness. His second marriage to Rita Wilson, an actress, had been a guiding beacon in the dark Hollywood landscape, a quiet love that blossomed into something more substantial as they worked together, got to know each other over time, and eventually fell head over heels for each other, through the good times and the bad. With Rita, he discovered more than just a friend. A soul matched his own. He finally discovered someone who could relate to his hidden anxieties, his nagging regrets, and the subtle sorrows that never sought validation but never went away entirely. Not long after the upheaval of their divorce, in 1988, they tied the knot. They appeared to be a remarkable balance to the public, since their bond was built by ordinary love and tempered by storms throughout the years. Raised in a home, hands intertwined at premieres, smiles exchanged at events that managed to maintain composure despite the challenges. But destiny can test even the strongest of bonds. And in 2015, Rita was dealt the devastating news of breast cancer, which broke their fantasy that nothing was untouchable and rocked their planet. The woman who had been Tom's rock and best friend, the one he had built his life around, now found herself in a fight for independence. In addition, she had reconstructive surgery following a double mastectomy, a surgical procedure that required more bravery hour by hour and a recuperation process that was significantly slower than optimistic. Expectations, fame, riches, and screenplays all faded into oblivion in the face of one truly important assignment. It was the first time in decades that Tom could not protect her from what hurt, because the dread of losing the person who had healed him was greater than any stage. He held her hand through appointments, offered encouragement when she stumbled, and cried alone when she needed him. After she had saved his life several times, he spoke slowly about how he could do nothing more than stay by her side and hope he wouldn't have to face the world alone. While that year passed, it felt like time stood still as Hollywood drew back, and home became a battlefield fought with the power of love, faith, and medicine instead of diplomacy and trophies. Rita made it through that chapter unscathed. However, visible and invisible wounds persisted. Scars brought with them a silent watchfulness that concealed timidity beneath courageous grins. Because after experiencing such a profound shock, you will never again confuse serenity for assurance. Since 2013, he had quietly and systematically controlled his type 2 diabetes, and that a single truth increased the danger of any subsequent disease. After their victory in 2015, a new storm requiring the same level of bravery struck 5 years later. By 2020, the world had already begun to descend into chaos. Among the first famous people to test positive for COVID-19 while he was filming in Australia were Tom and Rita. She was hit hard by the sickness as her sense of smell and taste faded. Fever lingered for much longer than anyone had hoped, and exhaustion set in. A life-threatening peril, not a passing concern, for Tom, who is now 63 years old and lives with type 2 diabetes. In a moment that affected everyone, the guy who was frequently cast as a symbol of strength suddenly became a symbol of weakness. There was a crescendo of news and numbers that sounded like a countdown. Not rumors, but the thought of abandoning Rita or having her see him deteriorate worried him. Not out of fear but in sober preparation, he sent peaceful farewell letters over those long nights away from home. Just in case, facing the unknown required more than just fortitude. Their world shrank to 4 sterile walls, and the presence that had always stabilized them, as they once again relied on each other in an isolated hospital room. It wasn't a lack of dread that kept Tom going. It was Rita's need that kept him going. He recorded his thoughts in a notebook, encouraged their frightened loved ones, and discovered little ways to entice her to be cheerful even if she was shaky. As is common for the faithful, the illness tested their faith. They were brought closer by the realization that fame cannot protect a person's heart from death. Plus, he felt different in the long run, so when recuperation finally arrived, it brought gratitude and change. Even after years of diabetes, his body was not as agile as it previously was. Even short walks left him breathless, and aches and pains in his joints and general exhaustion persisted even beyond the passing of the year. In order to hide his newfound insecurity about his job, his fear of being a burden, and whether or not a guy who had once played the hero would now require a steadying hand on the stairs, he put on an act for the sake of others and maintained his former charisma for himself. Despite their exhaustion, fear, and heightened bond, they emerged from the ordeal as one. He spoke frankly for the first time, saying that there is nothing to be afraid of when two people go through hell together, because the bond that forms through adversity is stronger than any enemy. Their love was real and genuine the whole time. There was chaos where there is life, testing where there is harshness, and years of pain experienced side by side purified it. That is why, when weaker relationships would have snapped, this one remained. Tom and Rita persevered, not because it was simple, but because they knew what it was like to lose everything through breast cancer, COVID, chronic disease, grief, celebrity, and uncertainty. Their dedication was redoubled, not diminished. By that awareness, the guy who had almost lost everything and the lady who would not leave his side in the worst conditions were the unsung heroes behind the acceptance speeches, red carpet grins, and viral acts of compassion. Their story was more about overcoming adversity than it was about being flawless, more of a tale of survival recounted in hushed tones of love than anything else. Ultimately, it was love, not talent or time, that propelled Tom Hanks to stardom, struggling with a non-glamorous and unending love that decides to manifest when all other things are uncertain. The struggles do not end just because he enters his late 60s. Time and diabetes continue to proceed at their own speed. There is a subtle victory, though, in every shaky hand and cautious stride onto the stage. The evidence of a guy who's alive and well, who loves and fights for both himself and the woman who walked with him through the flames. Simply said, they are more than just a Hollywood couple now. In a society where youth, glitz, and gloss rule, these two souls showed that the scariest love tales are the ones that last. Those who have witnessed their unbreakable link may attribute its enduring quality to that same reason. Tom Hanks's greatest challenge never showed up on a stage or set. It came on the day a dad realized he couldn't keep his son from running away. All eyes were on him because he personified grace, modesty, with hospitality. The guy who many people considered the father of the United States. However, nothing can ease the pain of seeing a youngster stumble. Chad strayed from the compassionate, kind, and tenacious legacy that his parents had established, despite being born into affluence. The path was rapidly paved with defiance, heavy drug usage, and public debate, which transformed personal concerns into a shared burden. For Tom, who had spent his entire life attempting to escape the disorder of his own youth, felt like he was witnessing history as he watched his son fight. The man was pounding on the door that he had promised not to open. As a parent, he silently supported Chad through rehab in 2015, clinging to any possible support system. On the other hand, getting back on your feet isn't a plug-and-play. In addition to heated outbursts and divisive social media posts, Tom and Rita's car was involved in a 2015 collision that sparked a lawsuit. According to the article, Chad allegedly begged the other driver not to contact the authorities, leading to accusations of intoxication and entanglements in the legal system that Tom and Rita were not responsible for. After decades of avoiding controversy and standing firm for ethics in an industry that frequently rewards the polar opposite, Tom saw those events as wounds to bear rather than scandals to devour. Suit, addiction, and contempt were now words that were associated with his kid. Later on, Chad referred to himself as the black sheep of the family, elevating a father's shame to a spiritual level, a moniker that Tom shied away from using, suggesting that he secretly drew the blood. Any caring parent would beg him to stop because of the inevitable follow-up questions. Had he become oblivious to his son's pain due to his success? Was the weight of his legacy pressing down on him when relief ought to have been there? He persisted in looking straight ahead. The man did not deny it. Neither denial nor anger were his actions. Love sticks firm even when it aches, so he remained silent and present. The air is colder than any floodlight, and the phone feels heavier than the hand holding it in late-night rooms. According to his friends, no amount of trophies could ever ease the feelings of shame and powerlessness he battled. The insecurity, isolation, and need for belonging that celebrity cannot satisfy may have echoed from his own history, which he may have recognized. After some time, Chad stated that he is sober and has opened up about the challenges of a celebrity upbringing, but the wounds never healed. Plus, they support what Tom already knew to be a harsh reality for many parents. No matter how desperate the situation, your love for your child must never give up. There were no lines to learn or marks to achieve in this job. The stakes were not career-defining, but defining. It was life as it unfolded unscripted. Plus, even though viewers had a hero on screens, there was a distraught parent behind the scenes who was still clinging on, hoping for the best. Tom Hanks still bears the silent echoes of hurts that, no matter how much success he has had, fame will never be able to erase, because every day he still has personal struggles that are too private to be discussed in public, on top of the public family strife. The broken relationships he had as a youngster and a near-death experience. Things that weigh you down, but you seemed composed and strong when you act calmly in front of others. While he carries on into his late 60s and beyond, the passage of time weighing him down with each stride. More stringent regimens, more self-discipline, and lengthier recovery times are all parts of the increasingly demanding everyday labor of living with type 2 diabetes. This chronic disease, which I was diagnosed with in 2013, requires regular monitoring and the unsettling knowledge that one stupid decision can upset everything. The man who had his body changed for is now being abandoned, which is a sad irony. Also, Philadelphia is currently waging struggle that goes unnoticed by the media. Despite the fact that getting older makes every fight seem more daunting, the public views an inspiring senior statesman without seeing the needles, careful plates, personal exhaustion of dealing with an incurable illness, or the minor successes achieved by patients as their energy wanes and muscles tire more quickly. Because respect can feel like a lonely crown, there is also the loneliness that lurks under the surface of tremendous praise. Even though he is surrounded by people and has a firm grasp on his achievements, he has confessed to feeling a sense of drift, nowhere, going back to their hotel rooms after standing ovations, and wondering in the quiet what's left when the cheers go out. An obliteration that comes not in flashes but in murmurs that wear down the spirit more as one grows older. The same perfectionist nature that helped him succeed may also bring him down. He has also mentioned a worry that is more tenacious than any evaluation, as well as self-doubt that pokes at every line, second-guessing over misread moments or missing beats, and so on. He worries that he won't have enough energy to make it through the day, and that he will be remembered only for yesterday's worthwhile today eludes him. He attempted to escape the shadow of recurrence, but perhaps the sharpest pain did not originate from his own body, because he has seen his old worries materialize despite his efforts to provide stability and love to his children. While Chad battles addiction and unpredictable public conduct, and Colin builds a respectable job, though he is frequently judged by his father's shadow, he has worried that they may feel just as broken as he was and has carried the shame of not being able to completely protect them, particularly from the pieces of himself he battled to repair. The world admires his kindness, which he cultivates despite his wounds, since he understands what it's like to be invisible and abandoned. He is generous with his time, money, and focus to complete strangers and worthy causes. However, even kindness can have its subtle costs. As time goes on, a man who is always helping others may neglect to create room for himself to heal, especially if he is a giver. Tom Hanks, the genial icon of innumerable beloved films, keeps fighting fights that aren't flashy or shocking, but nuanced, gradual, and essentially human. With poise he glides through them, never pleading for sympathy and rarely revealing their whole extent. However, while ignoring the cheers in on the carpets, you will witness a life molded by both achievements and private tragedies, met with unwavering bravery in the face of mounting pressure from age and sickness. This is also the tale of Tom Hanks, and maybe that is the most accurate aspect of all. The guy who once held a multitude of tales now holds on to a single, uncomplicated truth, that peace is not an end goal, but an ongoing practice to be revered. On the outside, Tom Hanks's current daily routine exudes stability, ease, and a quiet dignity that he has worked hard to achieve. Reportedly purchased for $26 million. His 14,000-square-foot sanctuary in Pacific Palisades, Los Angeles, is a tranquil, sun-drenched place where he maintains his center at the age of 69, a resort-style pool deck where tranquility is not consumed but savored is accessible through the carefully considered limestone and towering glass facade. His refuge doesn't stop in California. It extends to Inki Paros, a Greek island between Glaifa and Kora, where a 450-square-meter stone retreat sits amid olive trees, where the salt air carries tales of survival and time stands still. The spot where he and Rita Wilson reunite every summer. Naturalness, harmony, and mutual aid. Theirs is one of the longest-lasting Hollywood marriages, and it is foundational to his current life. Rita, who beat breast cancer in CO19, is my co-pilot, inspiration, and mirror. Our bond is not one of convenience but of weathering storms, overcoming disease, and unwavering commitment. Truman, CET, Elizabeth, and Colin all feel his constant presence as a parent, observing with pride, not as an arbiter but as a guide. A more sober and mature CIT strives to keep going forward, and Colin's steady respecting Elizabeth's privacy while being cognizant of the very public journeys of Truman and CET keeps him quietly hopeful. With a net worth of almost $400 million, he's among the wealthiest people in Hollywood. The rumored $70 million he made from Forest Gump is just the beginning of his tale of methodical investment in historic homes, seaside retreats, and even a nostalgic houseboat from the Bay Area where he spent his adolescence. Success viewed more as a means to an end than a badge of honor. Through their philanthropic giving to hospitals, schools, and organizations that promote dignity and opportunity. He and Rita continue to support causes such as arts, education, homelessness alleviation, and cancer research. And his assistance does not come in the form of a show, but of a constant, modest, and unassuming presence. He has also modified his public posture by opting for projects with cultural or emotional significance, such as A Man Called Otto or ongoing collaborations with Steven Spielberg. Rather than pursuing opportunities or seeking publicity, he has also become a popular podcast guest and an analytical essayist and short story writer interested in human nature, personal narrative, and the past. The serenity it exudes is probably the most noticeable feature of his current life. I prefer to think of it as having perspective rather than painlessness, along with his steady stride, joking with admirers, lengthy walks with Rita, an eclectic collection of antique and electric cars. He still navigates Los Angeles traffic on his own. Nothing flashy or grandiose is on exhibit. Only an individual who has thoughtfully and thankfully absorbed what lasts. Who knows that his present work is not a prize for stardom, but a decision made following many years of distraction, should attempt it. Perhaps the most profound tale he has ever told is contained in that decision, one that is lived with tenderness and elegance, rather than one that is scripted or framed on screen. There, his solitary tranquility becomes a victory in and of itself. Last but not least, Tom Hanks's most enduring quality is not a trophy case full of his accomplishments, but rather his humble and gracious demeanor toward everyone he meets. He views being decent as a daily chore, and being kind as a form of discipline. This proves that even when no one is looking, character may be consistent, predictable, and deliberate. Because listening attentively frequently has more impact than speaking loudly, he demonstrates that integrity may be silent and yet transform a room. Not only do his legendary roles attest to his impact, but so do the more placid hearts he has touched, and brighter times for those who have labored alongside him, and for others who have relied on his tales. Without making an audience out of himself, he has walked through hell. Plus, he has handled success with the kind of modesty that helps others remain grounded, never confusing praise for purpose. Greatness, he says, is more of a habit than a flash in the pan, and doing the right thing is a decision we make every morning rather than a headline. The objective is not to garner notoriety, but to make an impact, which is why his giving comes without fanfare. The goal is to make people feel more secure, visible, and empowered than they were before. In his hands, empathy has become an art form, patience a promise, and responsibility a grace that remains even when the lights go out. He shows that wounds may be used as guides instead of barriers, that second chances are worthwhile, and that hope is not innocent when it is disciplined. Stillness moves mountains, he says, and little acts of bravery repeated over time may make a big difference, even in a chaotic society. Peaceful upheaval. Please offer an homage to the guy and the meaning he has given if his work has ever helped. Steady you, if a scene or a word once found you at a trying hour. As a modest gesture of gratitude, hit the like button and spread the word about that time Tom Hanks showed you that being decent is something you can choose even in the present.